Dominated by aristocrats interested only in preserving their own power, Athens hardly seemed a state on the verge of building a great empire. But then Greece also seemed an unlikely land to give rise to greatness.
If you look at the physical world of Greece, it's not the kind of place that you'd immediately expect to produce a great civilization. Simply too many mountains. Greece does not have the obvious kind of physical unity that typically seems to be associated with the really great imperial civilizations of the ancient world.
The great civilizations of Cleisthenes' day had grown up around rivers and the fertile plains stretching from their banks. To the south of Greece lay Egypt, where the regular flooding of the Nile sustained a civilization already 2,000 years old. And to the east lay the Persians, at the heart of their empire lay the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This was the very birthplace of civilization, the home of the world's first cities. But mainland Greece had no great open plains. This was a landscape riven by mountain ranges. Off her coast lay countless tiny islands. It seemed impossible for a single ruler to dominate this fragmented world. Instead, Greece was divided into countless tiny nations called city-states, each fiercely independent, each with its own culture and history. In Cleisthenes' time, there were over 1,000 of these city-states, jostling with each other for land and power.
They never were politically unified, or at least in the classical period, never politically unified. And indeed, each individual Greek city-state, each polis, sought to maintain its own independence, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully.
In the early 6th century, Athens was not nearly the most powerful or important of these tiny nations. Argos had stood for over 1,000 years. Her citizens were able to trace their history back to the mythical days of the Trojan War. The Corinthians dominated Greek trade. Their ships plied the Mediterranean, ferrying goods back and forth from Egypt, Assyria, and Italy. But there was one city-state which had military power, which appeared that it might come to dominate all of Cleisthenes' Greece. In the south of Greece, around the reed beds of the river Eurotas, lay the city-state of Sparta. The Spartans were brought up from birth to be soldiers, raised in the field, separated from their families, their lives structured around discipline and war.
The center of an average Spartan man's life was his barracks, and he was brought up to be a military man.
The Spartans lived a life stripped of comforts, with few possessions apart from their weapons, and their cloaks dyed red to conceal their or their victims' blood.
Spartans were brought up to put up with anything, and all sorts of stories, the best being of a visiting Sybarite visiting Sparta, eating the local food and saying now he understood why the Spartans were so willing to die, because death was as nothing to eating their food.
The Spartans were ruthless expansionists. By Cleisthenes' time, they had conquered all of the surrounding regions, more than 4,000 square miles. And they had reduced these conquered populations to a slave class known as the Helots. The Helots were forced to work in the fields for their Spartan overlords, and they were ruled with an iron fist.
The Spartans every year declared war on the Helots, and the point of this was partly, of course, to reinforce their sense of identity as a warrior community, but also, rather calculatingly, to make it legitimate to kill a Helot. And Helot culling, as opposed to killing, was a regular practice.
If there was any part of Cleisthenes' Greece that looked like it might build an empire, it was Sparta. For the rest of the Greeks, they were a threat, always on the horizon. This was the world of Cleisthenes' childhood. Brought up a member of a self-interested elite in a state that was only a third-rate power. It was an unlikely beginning for the man who would set Greece on the path to empire. But then Cleisthenes had always been a man fired by a dream. A uniquely Greek vision of the greatness a man could achieve.